Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone, and welcome back to Sophie's Stories, the podcast bringing you original, handcrafted stories right into your ear holes. I'm so glad to have you back here with me today, and the reason is because, as I said last time, I'm bringing back some of my stories that are already on my podcast channel, which you can find at Sophie Stories Podcast on Spotify or wherever you listen to podcasts. So today I'm bringing another one of my original stories here to YouTube for you to enjoy all the same. So I wrote this story during COVID. It's kind of a murder mystery whodunit, and it's in quite a few parts. So this will keep me going for a little while, and I'll release the remaining parts soon. So I really hope you enjoy. This story is called The Turn. As the morning began to bloom, the warm rays of the sunrise melted the frost, and its newly created motion permeated the soil below. My hot breath hit the glass, pace by pace, as the wheels crunched over the cold morning gravel. It cracked and cricked and pung onto the lawn. The cold of the morning seemed to capture every single breath, every sound, and any precious movement the vibrant morning had to offer, and consumed it into the wondrous backdrop of dense trees and foliage. The heavy car rolled to a stop. I peered over the driver's shoulder momentarily. "Thank you, miss," he whispered. "Thank you," I replied sheepishly, my stomach tight and skin cold. I grabbed my black holdall and opened the door. The car swung around behind me, the noise absorbed by the stark sight my eyes fell upon next. I found myself dwarfed in the shadow of a huge log building. Not cabin, building. The wood was varnished, beige, and gleaming in the light, contrasting with the tree line behind it. Navy blue double doors, framed with polished brass, stared back at me. Almost as imposing as the impressive structure it was attached to. The building stood 3 stories high, exclusively constructed of timber. Although not ornate, nor crafted with aesthetic in mind, it looked sturdy and sound. Something about the silence drew me closer to the door, and before I knew it, I was knocking on it confidently. I could hear the chaps echo down an empty hallway on the other side. Maybe no one else was here yet. No sooner had I thought this when the door on the right was flung open from the other side. This unveiled a tall police officer. I didn't recognize the uniform, but he wore a bulletproof vest covered in high-vis and was staring at me from below his brow. His dark chestnut brown eyes bore into me dimly, and his sense of expectance bred furiously in the space between us. This expression seemed more complicated than one it would take to look at me. "Sarah Kemper," I stated. "And?" he prompted impatiently. "Oh, I'm here with Mbach." "Thank you," he snapped. "Come in." He opened the door further and turned his back. His black, heavy boots rumbled over the thick wood floor as he walked away, leaving a strong odour of arrogance in his wake. Hoping my nostrils would spontaneously block themselves or simply no longer exist, I stepped through the threshold and became the recipient of a crushing sense of tension and pressure. As I looked up into the winding staircase and dropped my bag onto the floor beside me, I realised my policeman friend was gone. A crying shame. Since the pandemic, many iterations of white-collar workplaces had joined forces, and different companies created an alliance of sorts. Throughout the midst of the never-ending work-from-home policy, they then began a nationwide round-robin tournament of workplace holiday retreats. Unfortunately, I lived alone when the disease originally struck the country, so only ever received one invitation. The logic being that only certain pods should mix with other certain pods and therefore stunt the spread of the disease. This experience replaced the bulk of my standard holiday entitlement, but generally I didn't mind. Usually showing up for a week to slowly replace my entire blood volume with cheap tequila. I do love tequila. So I had convinced myself with the help of toxic positivity logic that love literally ran through my veins at these retreats. And love is good, right? As the thought of becoming obliterated for free began to comfort me, I was interrupted by my momentary joy with the sound of a gentle, relenting laughter. I looked through the doorway to the end of the hall and saw figures gathered around a table outside. I bent down and unzipped my hold-all. It revealed a friendly-looking bottle of wine, which I grabbed enthusiastically and made off with towards the group. Although tequila made me forget, wine made my taste buds forget. Thoroughly planning for our dinner of questionable quality later in the evening. As I strolled through the beautiful residence, filled with amazing furniture and minimal artwork, the group came into view. The source of the laughter I had heard earlier, Lucy, in a soft cream jumper and a ponytail a few seconds from falling out of her messy, mousy brown hair, saw me through the floor-to-ceiling patio doors and lit up like a Christmas tree. Lucy was a few years younger than me, eyes full of hope and astounding naivety. She was joyfully uncomplicated. "Sarah!" she exclaimed. As she sauntered towards me, a cold glass of white in her hand, she brought me into a soft embrace. Smelling of cotton-scented lotion and expensive floral perfume. Every human meeting another shares an experience. My experience of her had me imagining fresh laundry and scented candles. I always wondered what she felt like when she saw me. "Come and sit with me, Sarah. There's a seat free." She led me over to a small log covered in a sheepskin blanket. Comfort at its finest, truly. I placed my sacrificial offering, wine, on the table as I sat down on my seat, stump, and drew my eyes up and across the circle of expectant-looking eyes staring back at me. I turned to Lucy as she smiled dozily at me. "Where is everyone else, huh?" I said. She sighed wearily. "Oh, well, HR declined the invite entirely. Danny's team won't be here till tomorrow, and Laura's team all have family plans. In other words, none of them are fun, and we will forge ahead with drinks and canapes without them." She mimed a cheers and relaxed back into her actual chair. I nodded in response and shrugged my shoulders, reaching for a glass of wine poured for me by the man to my right. I turned slightly. "Thanks, John. Well deserved, I think." He smiled graciously and replied, "No problem, Sarah Kay." Of the things I'd never thought about John, I would think if I ever had to present an award for most polite, he'd be one of my top nominees. He looked into me and smiled for a second. I had to break our gaze as I sensed a body moving through the morning room and turned to see the police officer exiting back into the hallway of the grand house. I turned my eyes to John. His dark brown eyes gleamed playfully amongst his silky skin, and he raised his glass up and pinged it off mine. John was the only person who called me Sarah Kay. It reminded me of being in school, when someone else shared your first name but no one could come up with a more creative solution. It didn't bother me, but it always stuck with me. "And how did you get here, Sarah?" A timid voice sprung up from my left. I looked over at Tom, a gaunt, soft man staring at me intently through thick-framed glasses. His hair fluttered in the gentle wind playfully in a way that did not match his personality. Not meaning to, he did suck some of the energy from me as we spoke. I looked back at him and smiled a little, hoping it would plant a seed of joy in him. Assuming I failed after seeing the blank expression that dressed his face, I answered, "Oh, someone in the back office ordered me a taxi, so I thought I'd treat myself." He noticeably relaxed a little. "Same here. My car still has the kayak strapped in, so doesn't play very well with the wind." "Ah, yes," I thought. "The raging storm we're currently experiencing." Putting it down to his fragile disposition, I nodded in agreement. Lucy, with her seemingly bottomless sense of enthusiasm, started to talk to him. Or at him, whichever description is more fitting. I was grateful, he was not. I turned to John as the sunrise brought the skin on his face to life a little, and asked, "How did you get here, John?" He sensed my slight sarcasm and chuckled. "Oh, I took the train. It was hot with the mask on and stuff, but, didn't take long." In fact, it had taken too long. As I learned, it had taken 8 hours. It pained me to imagine it, chiefly because my personal experience of a train journey led me to projectile vomit in a moving toilet. John and I covered a couple of topics: set menu speculations and bedroom allocations, until we had one more join our small party. A woman, mid-40s, fluttered over with a caramel-coloured shawl on her shoulders and beads of sweat on her brow. She threw herself onto the empty deck chair between John and Tom. As she settled down and adjusted her clothes, John poured her a large glass of wine. This was Lucille, a demanding but not entirely unpleasant woman who I would describe aptly as neurotically detail-orientated. Horrible company at work, but spectacular at rallying drunk stragglers. Lucille looked over the group, surveying us, for what I can only imagine were quality control purposes. I turned to her, displaying decidedly relaxed body language, and started, "Lucille, how have you—" She cut me off almost instantly. "Sarah, you made it here before me," she stated pointedly, momentarily casting her eyes over John before aligning her eyeline with mine again. "Yes," I said. "Do I win some sort of prize?" She scoffed. "The prize was the extra glass of wine you had before I got here." She was right, and I was happy. "John, I'm so glad to see you made it," she exclaimed. As they began to chat, I sat back a little and surveyed the large lawn beside us on the patio. It sprawled out at least 5 acres in a brilliant green carpet until it touched the furrowed edge of the dark forest. I turned my attention back to the multi-story cabin and could see various bodies milling around inside. All police, I assumed, until John interrupted my thought like he could read my mind. There's a couple of the team still inside, freshening up and such, he said with a flourish. Freshening up? It's 11 a.m. And before you think of judging me for the wine, don't. I nodded. Oh, who's still inside? I said. Well, Joyce brought her sister, Abby, so they're here. Abby just texted me and he trailed off, but Tom cut in. Brian and his wife, he said plainly. Oh, great, I replied, silently counting the remaining glasses of wine left in the bottles on the table. The morning sun cast a warm blanket over my back as I waited for the others to arrive. It cradled me in a comfort as I braced myself for the incoming ruckus. John leaned into my shoulder. How many bottles did you bring? Just this, sadly, I replied. He looked at me with feigned disappointment. Well, I heard there's a wine cellar, if you'd care to accompany me to find it. He gestured away from the table. Absolutely, I decided. We both got up from the table and excused ourselves, being ignored entirely. Fantastic. As we made ground towards the patio doors, Lucy looked up with happy but desperate eyes and mouthed, Where are you going? I mimed drinking from a glass, and she gave me a resounding thumbs up. I followed John through the morning room and back into the hallway. I surveyed it slightly on the way, noticing my bag was no longer there. Are you coming? John prompted. I nodded as he continued through a small kitchen with a flagstone floor and out of a side door secured with a large, worn, silver key. John opened the door and led me out, pocketing the key as he left. Upon our exit, I was surprised to be presented with a whole complex of single-storey buildings sprawled out across the green and into a sparse area of forest on the left-hand side of the main cabin. All their main doors were jammed open with doorstops. Must be drafty. John and I waddled down a worn path to a stone outhouse covered with a thatched roof. A small diamond-shaped window filled with blue glass sat above the light, rickety wooden door. We filed in through the poorly designed entrance to a room that felt like a greenhouse. The air was thick, as though it was all trapped in time. It felt slightly suffocating, but we were here for a good cause. John rushed straight over to a bottom row of the wine rack in the far corner of the room and started searching. I looked over the array of variously coloured bottles, some new and some old. I would have no idea where to start, so was glad John appeared to be taking charge in this particular venture. He started to pull a bottle from the bottom row and held it out for me to grab it. Should be fine, he muttered as he continued to search. The bottle clenched in both fists, I stood with my back to the open door. A sensation slowly crept over me and spiked my palms with a dose of adrenaline. Sweat poured from my skin for a second, and I felt the need to turn around. In doing so, the bottle dropped swiftly onto the stone floor. There was nothing out there. I turned around to see the bottle shattered on the floor at my feet. John was suddenly standing directly in front of me. What a mess, he stated blankly. I looked at him for a second, frozen. Oh, I'm so sorry. Look what I've done, I said, hoping to prompt him into a conversation to break the sudden tension. I bent down and started to pick up the various shards of glass carefully. He didn't move. I looked up at him from my crouch position on the floor and caught him looking directly out of the door behind me. I looked back again. Still nothing. He snapped out of his daze and crouched down to help me. Oh, don't worry. Shit happens and then you die. I mean, I agreed, but I was hoping he didn't mean me personally and prematurely. He smiled and we both stood up and threw the glass outside of the door to the wine cellar. John went back in to grab the other bottle he'd selected and closed the door behind us. He placed his hand lightly on the small of my back and said, "Come on, gently." We wandered around the side of the house. I looked into the forest as we walked and admired its intricacies and strong earth-like smell that was slightly damp in nature. It mixed pleasingly with John's aftershave. "Sarah Kay, tell me, what's been happening in your love life? Any special people?" he asked. Well, that came out of nowhere. I searched his face for a moment, wondering if there was any subtext attached to his question. I played along. "No, there's no one. It's much less complicated that way," I offered, trying for the most bland answer possible. "Ah, come on, Sarah Kay. You don't expect me to believe that, do you?" He seemed shocked, but I was shocked that my hermit lifestyle hadn't hinted to my affinity with abstinence before. "I've just been having a break from the dating scene. It's all the same, you know." He nodded, caressing the wine bottle with his free hand. "What about yourself?" I offered, hoping to shift some of the light off me. "Ah, no luck yet, Miss Kay. I'm afraid I'll be a spinster." We chuckled as the complete group came into view, their murmurings deadened by the cold, tight air. Their breath steamed up and floated away above their heads. John announced, "You all finally made it." John rushed over to the table, placed the wine down gently, and made the rounds, giving everyone a hug. When he reached Joyce, his signature pleasantries ceased suddenly as he moved on from her quickly. Joyce followed him round the rest of the circle with a stare that could kill a horse. The expression on her face seemed to pour back into her glass as she tipped it to take a sip. Her heavy blue eyes dropped down towards her nose, accusatory and framed by black, shiny hair. I then caught her eye, unfortunately, and she flitted her gaze away from mine in disgust. Obviously, my outward appearance or effect otherwise displeased her. Unwilling to submit to her antics, though, I said, "Joyce, it's lovely to see you. How was the funeral?" Her father had recently passed away in a set of circumstances best described as vague. She tilted her head slightly, screwing a retorting look into my soul. "It went as planned. Lovely to see you again, though, Sarah. You're looking healthy," she said. It was as if my Aunt Trudy had risen from the grave for one last comment too seductive to be left unsaid regarding my unchanged weight. Some things simply never die. As my mind wandered, I looked over to Abby. She was simply immaculate. Long golden tresses fell like tiny waterfalls over her petite shoulders as she smiled, lighting up the circle with her elegance and quiet happiness. The fluff reaching up from her white cardigan shone in the morning sun and encircled her in a small, gleaming glow. She was quiet and gentle, so I could see why John had eyes for her. I mean, I had no proof, but I hoped he had at least attempted to slide into her DMs, so to speak, after all these years. They'd be a beautiful couple. Lucy stood up and excused herself from the table, taking her wine with her. I assumed she would be a while. As she sauntered into the house and through the hallway, she struck up a conversation with the policeman who had welcomed me to the compound. After the pandemic, various fractions of the police had become unofficially privatised. I learned to apply the basic assumption that these police officers were not present for my protection or preservation. The officer and Lucy stood unusually close, but I assumed she required the short distance to hear his muffled voice through his mask. Amongst the chatter, I felt a gentle prod on my left arm. Tom tapped me again. I turned to see his deadened eyes staring back at me. "What's up?" I asked playfully. "Have you been up to your room?" he said, leaving the conversation somewhere. "Oh, no, not yet. I haven't chosen one yet." "Ah, it's been assigned, you know. The list is just opposite the front door." This was as enthusiastic as Tom ever got, to the utter dismay of our sales managers. "Oh, I'll have to take a look then." "I think you should," he confirmed, leaning back and looking away. At this stage, I was starting to feel the effects of the white wine. The events unfolding in front of me fluttered away as quickly as they came. I rested my glass back on the table and took a small, deep breath. "I'm heading upstairs, everyone. I'll see you in a little while," I announced. The group murmured their temporary goodbyes and I plodded back inside the grand residence once more. Upon entering, I could smell the aged pine and fireplace raging on the far wall. It was like staying in a poorly produced Christmas film. I reached the hallway and took a second to nonchalantly locate the room allocation list. I ignored the rest of the list and located Sarah and Lucy. Yes, we were next door to each other. That will certainly brighten up this whole tight affair. Small blessings become big over time. I started up the creaking staircase and onto the second floor. Lucy had tied a silk neck scarf on her door handle, and I found the room next to it, with a nameplate plastered on it. I burst open the door, rather more energetically than intended, and saw my small hold all placed carefully on the cream bedspread. Wood slats covered the floors, walls, and ceiling. Large and suffocating, the room looked back at me with a huge double bed centered in the middle. A small hand-woven rug sat beside the head of the bed, and opposite a large desk, with a mirror lining the back wall. The window, one vast continuous pane, filled the room with light obnoxiously as I looked through it and onto the green and subsequent forest outside. I removed my boots at the door and padded into the room in my woolen socks. I unzipped the top of my bag and searched for my toothbrush. As I sifted through my belongings, I came across something that felt different in amongst them. I couldn't describe the feeling other than just different. The hard, cold edges grazed my fingertips, and I reached in fully to pull out the foreign object. It slid out from my various pajamas and socks comfortably, and was only about 5 centimetres in length and 2 in breadth. I held it in my hand and stared at it. It was a digital voice recorder. My mind was cast back swiftly to my early childhood, watching cinematic depictions of journalists fighting for front-page news with these devices in hand. A small red light was blinking on the front under the timer. I instinctively pressed the stop button, as if I were currently being recorded, and so were my thoughts. I questioned the last time I had seen my bag, and it was when I removed the wine bottle from the top of it. It had been hours since then. I tore open the rest of my bag and lay all my belongings out side by side on the freshly made bed. As I surveyed them, I didn't notice anything missing, nor altered in any way. I stopped as the hairs on the back of my neck stood to attention, and there was a firm knock on my bedroom door. And that is the end of part 1 of The Turn. I really hope you enjoyed the start of the story. As you can imagine, just by the length of this part, it's a little bit long because I wanted you to have a solid whodunit. Because if it's not a solid whodunit, it's not worth it. So I really hope you enjoyed today's story, and don't forget to stay curious. I'll see you next time. Bye.